Hey everyone, you're listening to Athletes Beyond the Mind, a sports psychology and mental training podcast. Athletes Beyond the Mind is brought to you by Close the Gate Hoops and Close the Gate Hoops Mindset. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy this episode. Hi everyone, welcome back to Athletes Beyond the Mind. This week's topic is how to refocus. And this can be refocusing during your sport, refocusing during school, those boring classes, or just refocusing in general on whatever you need to do. I think we talk a lot about, and not just me, but just coaches, teachers are always like, focus, 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 focus. Our brains are not trained to be focused 100% of the time and at 100% capacity. We need those little mental breaks, and knowing that and knowing how to take those even during a game, like let's say you play soccer, you have a 90-minute game. Basketball, it's either divided in quarters or halves depending on if you're on the women's or men's team, things like that. And how can you really stay focused for such a long period of time and be at your best when you have so many distractions in your life and when your brain isn't really trained to focus for that long and be focused that intensely for so long? So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about this week, is just how to refocus and the importance of it. So to start, again, like coaches are always like, you gotta focus, you gotta focus, you gotta focus. But what does that really mean? Focus is all about where your attention is and your ability to keep that attention on one thing. People talk a lot about, oh, well, I'm a really good multitasker. You can't actually successfully multitask. What's happening is your brain is shifting back and forth between 2 tasks, 3 tasks, whatever it is you're doing. It's quickly shifting back and forth between these tasks. You're not really focusing on one thing. You're not really multitasking. You're just quickly shifting that it's so quick you don't really notice that you're shifting it. But especially in your sports, or if you have a big test coming up or a presentation, it's really important to learn how to focus on that one thing, put all your effort into that one thing so that you can be successful in whatever you're doing and that you don't have those distractions coming at you, throwing your mind off of what you need to, your mindset being lowered, and then not being as successful or as talented as you truly are because your mind's not focused on what it needs to be. So, how can you refocus? How can you take those mini breaks to make you successful? So, being able to refocus, it really depends on who you are, is what you're going to need to do. It really shifts, because I could say, oh, you should do this, and that will work for 4 out of 10 people, or maybe even 9 out of 10, but that 1 out of 10 it's not working for, that really stinks if there's nothing else offered for them. So it's all about figuring out what works best for you. If you're someone who needs to say verbally out loud, okay, my focus is going to be back at this. I have this big test, so let's focus on these 2 questions and I'll take a mini break. Maybe let's just do basketball as an example. Let's say you're on the court. You usually don't get subbed out. You're one of the top players. You're getting a lot of those minutes. How are you able to refocus when you get distracted by that fan yelling at you, or you get distracted because you made a mistake? How do you move past that? Those are the sort of things that you need to start learning about, and also learning when you can take those breaks. So in sports, a lot of times if you get subbed out, if there's a timeout, or if there's a moment you can just take a 10-second hesitation to be like, okay. So maybe it's when it's an out-of-bounds play and they're getting the ball. You can take a quick little break, look around, shake it out, take that breath, and then you can focus back in. But how do you know what works for you, and how can you kind of improve your focus, your attention, and your concentration, which are all different words, but mean along the same line? So how can you really do that? The importance is of finding those spots for those mini breaks, learning what distracts you, what's on your mind that day that you kind of need to get out of your system before your competition, before your test, before your presentation, whatever it may be. And also giving yourself a break mentally, physically, not just during the competition or the test, but also before and after. You have to give yourself breaks. Otherwise, you're just going to get burnout and worn out, and you won't ever be able to bring that focus back. So let's start first with just talking about what distracts you. Those distractions, I could put up a little graphic of like a million things that could possibly be a distraction. And those are all true. I mean, you all are human. So you have those thoughts about school and sports and your friends and your family, and maybe you have like a sports competition, but you also have a test and a presentation, or maybe you're learning how to drive, or maybe something like a big change is happening in your life. This list could go on and on. But being able to like make note of what could possibly distract you. Maybe, again, you're playing competition and you know there's going to be, like, this is a high, big rivalry, and you know there's going to be those fans that are calling at you, that are having their songs, their chants, things like that to try to distract you. Make note of that. Make note of you just had this really big fight with your friend or your significant other, and you know that's going to be on your mind. How can you get rid of that? That's another note. You have 3 big exams coming up next week. Make note that that could be a distraction because it's going to be on your mind. Maybe you had a not so great practice the day before. That's going to be on your mind. Make note of that, etc., till you have a pretty good idea of what could distract you. Because now that you know what could, now you can go to this next step of learning how to push those things out of your mind and bring your focus back what you need to. And those kind of go back to previous conversations we have or previous blog posts we have about like controlling the controllables. So that big fight with your friend, that's not fun. It sucks when you're in a fight with your friend or your significant other like that. That's really hard, and that's a pretty big weight on your shoulders and a pretty big thing on your mind. But while you're in your competition or your test or your presentation, there's nothing you can do about it. So remind yourself of that, and then remind yourself of the action you can take later. So you can reach back out to your friend. You can sit down and talk to them. Or if it's something more your fault, you can also apologize. If you have a big test, like those 3 exams coming up next week, let's say it's coming up to midterms if you're in college, and you have these midterms coming up and you're like, okay, well, I have these 3 exams, and with this game and all our practices and our lifts and our things like that, how am I going to have time to actually study? That's another totally valid thing to distract you. And it doesn't change the fact that you still have those responsibilities of the competition and practice. So it's about that time management and building into your schedule like, okay, I know I have practices here, I have classes here, this is when I have time to study. Let's plug that in to my calendar that I'm going to study during that instead of taking that mid-afternoon nap. Or maybe you haven't seen your family in a while and you know they're going to be there, and even though that's a good distraction, it's still a distraction because you're thinking like, I can't wait to see them, like I can't do all of that. But they're coming to see you play, they're coming to see you, and they don't want to be a distraction to you. So remind yourself of that. And again, do that with every distraction you can think of, just as you're kind of warming up and you're thinking about, okay, I have this game tonight, what's going to distract me? So part 1 was listing the distractions. Part 2 was kind of fighting against the distractions and why they shouldn't be on your mind right this minute, that they're all important, but right now this is not the most important thing. And then it's step 3. How, when you do get distracted during the game, can you A, give yourself a break at some point so that you can be as focused as possible when you need to be, and 2, refocus your attention when you need to. And these almost go hand in hand, because if you're not giving yourself breaks, it's going to be even harder to do that refocus. So ways you can give your break. Like I said, if you get subbed out, that's a great moment. If you have an hour for a test, take a minute about halfway through just to give yourself a little breather, a little moment to just let everything go crazy, and then bring it back into that test. Or whatever other big opportunity or big competition you have going on. See when you can have that break. Or again, like I said, with that out of bounds play, that's a great moment. They're running to get the ball or something like that. You take those 10 seconds and you're just like, I can do this. I'm focused. Let's go back at it. And then the second thing is learning how to refocus. So yes, you gave yourself a break, but now that break is pretty enjoyable and you're liking the break and your brain needs it. Like you've been really pushing and pushing. So how can you train yourself to refocus. So that's just something you need to practice, which I know is really annoying that it's not just a quick little fix of it's really easy to refocus, but it's about reminding yourself what you need to focus on. It's it could be physically changing the way you're sitting, you're standing, staring where you need to, things like that. It's also about training your brain to be able to focus longer and being able to block out the distractions. So when you do get distracted, you're yep, that's a distraction, I'm back here. Things like that. And a really good way of practicing that is doing attention grids, puzzles, things like that. And attention grids are just grids that have numbers, all usually 1 through 100, and they're just kind of scattered in this box. So it's organized, but it's not just 1, 2, 3, 4. It could be 7, 94, 62, like that, and going and trying to get them all in order as quickly as possible, or seeing how many you can do in a minute and kind of practicing that, because that requires you to focus right here on this concentration grid versus all the other things going around. Because if you're focusing on everything around you, you won't be able to get very many numbers in order before that time is up if you do it that way. Or if you're just trying to find them all as quickly as possible, your time's going to be longer. You can also, remind yourself of what the distractions are and remind yourself of why it's not important to focus. And that's obviously if you have more time versus, a quick 10 seconds you need to refocus. You can have some mantras, some quick things of I need to focus because blah, blah, blah. Or just little things you can say to yourself to help refocus would be really awesome and an easy, great way of doing that. But again, it's something you got to practice. It's not something where you're just I'm going to work on my focus and I'm going to be really great at always focusing all the time. No, you still need to find those moments where you can take a break. And I talked about taking a break within this, the game or the test. But I also want to mention the importance of taking breaks just generally, because you all are doing a lot. As just the two identities of being a student athlete, your plates are already almost full. You already got a lot going on. You have classes, you have practices, you have exams, presentations, workouts, competitions. That's already a lot of things you're juggling, or a lot of things on your plate, whichever metaphor you want to go with. So you gotta learn to take breaks throughout your week and throughout your day so that you're not worn out and burnt out where you can't learn to refocus once it's gone. Because if you're so tired, physically, mentally, one, it's going to be easier for you to lose focus because your brain is just so exhausted. It wants a break, so it gets distracted by every little thing. And two, it's going to be harder to pull yourself back into that focus, that refocusing, because you're so exhausted. Those neurons just aren't going to be firing quick enough. You're not going to be able to remember what you're focusing on. So make sure you're doing things just for yourself. That could be a nap. That could be just taking 5 minutes in your day of checking to make sure you're doing okay, that you've had enough water, that you've had enough food, that you haven't just been sitting all day, things like that. So yeah, refocusing, it's talked about all the time, focus, focus, focus. We're not trained, our bodies aren't made to be 100% focused 100% of the time, but we also all know that there are moments when we need to be focused, so learning how to stay focused and refocus when we do get distracted in those moments are really important. And so again, things to work on, list the possible distractions that could happen during your competition, your test, etc. List ways that you can remind yourself that yes, those are important, but they're not as important right now as whatever else is going on, that you can deal with them later, and that they do not need to be in the forefront of your mind. Learn how to take little breaks during your competition or your test. Learn how to take big breaks throughout your weeks and days. And practice focusing. Practice learning how to focus on only one thing and not trying to be a great multitasker, because that's not something that's possible. So practice with those attention grids. Practice by doing puzzles or other things that really train your mind into only focusing on one thing, only having your attention drawn on one thing. So yeah, thank you all for listening. This week was all about focusing and how to refocus, and we'll see you next week. Thank you all for listening to Athletes Beyond the Mind, a mental skills and sports psychology podcast. Please follow us on all social media at CTG Mindset.